One thing that I never understood was the internet racism community's collective obsession with Asians, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask why. But what happens when a racist guy that idealizes Asians has a dungeon master that's half Asian and half black? Roll post. I've been playing D&D since middle school, but I ended up taking a little break from it in my first semester of university as I got adjusted. At the start of this past spring semester, I was ready to get back into things, so I joined my school's D&D club. Most tables already had established groups and were continuing games that they started in the previous semester. But, to my luck, there was one new group that was gathering players to start a new game. Even better, this DM was someone I knew and was friendly with, as she was a fellow officer of our school's sex ed organization. We hadn't spoken much before, but finding out we shared a hobby led to us becoming much better friends over the course of the following events. Once we gathered enough players to start the campaign, we had a quick session 0. There were 6 players total, consisting of myself, that guy who played a Hexblood Barbarian, and ended up being a huge problem, and 4 other cool but irrelevant players who are all great, playing a druid, cleric, fighter, and rogue. Then there was the DM, who unfortunately requires some relevant description. The DM is biracial, half black, half Asian, and is proud of her heritage. She's also very tall, about 6 foot tall, and somewhat chubby, a description she 100% approves of, uses herself, and does not take any offense to. She's insanely intelligent when it comes to things like math, engineering, physics, and especially biology. She seems to intimately know every aspect of the anatomy of every animal off the top of her head. Finally, she's a very touchy-feely kind of person and liberally gives out hugs and kisses to her friends, regardless of their gender. To my knowledge, nobody in the group is uncomfortable with this, and as I said, we both work for sex ed organizations, so she has a firm knowledge of boundaries and consent, and she's sure to stay more hands-off with people who don't explicitly say she can be that way with them. The DM said during session 0 that while she had been involved with D&D for years, having played a couple of campaigns and getting really into the character optimization scene, this would be the first campaign that she would be seriously DMing. She had also said that she was completely fine with people clarifying rules for her. She had been preparing this campaign for a long time, and that she would communicate regularly to see if she was doing a good job. When she said this, I kid you not, that guy picked up the stack of books he had on the table, loudly dropped them back down, and said,
Well, this is going to be fun.
We all just kind of laughed that off, but in hindsight, it was a big red flag of what was to come. I don't know, was that a red flag? I can understand that this was foreshadowing in hindsight, but if someone did that at my table, I wouldn't think twice about it, probably because even after over a decade of playing D&D, I still need to be corrected on rules from time to time. But one thing I've seen recurring in these stories, so much that it could be added to RPG story bingo, is people blaming themselves for something they realistically wouldn't have detected. The DM says they're going to need correction, someone says this is going to be fun in a slightly obnoxious way, and I just don't see how anyone was supposed to watch that happen and think to themselves, oh shit, I should watch this guy, like, really closely, maybe kick them out. I just feel bad that in hindsight, people blame themselves for things that really aren't their fault. Because realistically, if that one thing was enough to set off alarm bells in anyone's head, even if they turned out to be right, they would still be kinda crazy. Anyways, we started the campaign, and honestly, I was blown away. While she was clearly still new, her inexperience was offset by the sheer amount of prep she put in. She had effectively gone through the entire monster manual. She had thought about the biology and ecology of every creature in the game, making huge spreadsheets full of food chains and monster parts. She had homebrewed a super robust harvesting, crafting, and cooking system, and also rewrote the entire Artificer class to fit our group and mesh better with the world, which I had great fun playing in. The world she made for us was full and alive with the history, while not being too complex, having some very interesting bits that interacted with the modern world. The pacing was kind of slow. It took us a while to get to the main plot, but once we did, the amount of freedom and creativity we experienced as we pulled off a series of heists and assassinations on bad guys was great. Not enough is said about the benefits of good session prep. If you're putting in the work and genuinely investing time into improving your craft as a dungeon master, it shows every single time. DMing is really several different hobbies in a trench coat. It's performing, storytelling, writing, game design. If you do minis, it can also be art. Rarely, but not rare enough, I hear people talk about prep versus improv as if they're different styles that somehow don't complement each other. But good prep will make your improv better, and being good at improv will cover everything you couldn't prepare for. Another thing that we don't hear as often is that players can do session prep too. They can also improve their skills. A lot of weight is put on DMs to always perform and do their best, but players can and should pull their weight too. However, she was still clearly new to the actual running of the game. At first, her roleplay was kind of awkward, and she often had to go back and reiterate what NPCs had said to give out the right information, and she didn't know some of the rules relevant to running combat. This was all well and good, as any one of us at the table would have been happy to step in and politely correct her, but nobody else got the chance because that guy was always the first to speak up. Loudly and annoyingly, he would always start by making this noise, opening his book and saying, "You might want to check the page and try saying that again. Correctly this time." This was his go-to format for correcting the DM. It was so annoying. After the first few times, the DM was not having it. At session 3, she would cut him off and say, "All right, I get it. Just tell me the proper ruling instead of telling me to read the book." That guy would argue, "I'm just trying to help you learn better." This would set off a small argument until one of us other players would interject with the correct ruling and the DM forced the game back on track. On top of that guy was consistently making pretty off-color jokes. Crude humor was allowed at the table, but he just wasn't funny. For example, as soon as we met 2 bookstore-keeping women, who were lesbians, he immediately told them in character that he wants to watch. It was so unfunny. We all just stared at him. He then corrected himself with an,
"I mean, I want to buy a watch."
Obviously, bookstores don't sell watches. He had ended up pissing off one of the owners so much that she raised the prices on all goods to our party. In another instance, after we had helped a little shapeshifter girl retrieve a lost toy, he told her she could thank him by letting him bang her mom while she's in wolf form. We found him, the Loser City D&D player. Actually though, so far, even during this, the problem player's only crime is just being really obnoxious. But this is also when the red flags and alarm bells are probably ringing in most players' heads. Not that this guy is a bad person or needs to be kicked out immediately, but that the correct take so far is that he's just really not self-aware to the detriment of everybody else. And the problem with people who lack self-awareness is that they usually don't fix their problems before making a million mistakes and hurting themselves socially. It's a hard thing to watch, and that guy is going to continue to get worse. The whole table immediately went quiet for several seconds before the DM basically went, "Okay," and turned the girl's attention to the rest of us. His behavior in-game was disruptive and bad, but it also extended out of game too. Aside from the DM, our party is all guys, with just one of us being a trans guy cleric. He constantly called the cleric cute, despite the discomfort he's gotten in response, and when the DM goes to hug cleric, that guy has said, "When two girls do it, it's fine, but when I do it, it's gay." To which the whole group at once reminded him the cleric is a guy. In fact, he got weird any time the DM showed physical affection to anyone in his presence. He would constantly try to police her, telling her that she shouldn't hug, hang on to, or kiss her friends on the cheek, unless she wanted them to think that she wants to sleep with them. The DM, for the most part, acted like she didn't hear any of this when he said it, and she never approached a 7-foot radius of him at any time. Later on, a cool new game store opened up far away, so we all took a road trip to check it out. On the ride there, he tried to lay his head on her shoulder out of nowhere. Okay, pause. This is the most revealing thing that he's ever done. That guy constantly brings up sexual stuff and sees it everywhere, even in places where it doesn't exist. He's so disgusted by it that he complains and tries to stop anyone else from doing anything that he perceives that way. So he's criticizing other people for being sexual when he's the only person sexualizing anything. Even worse, he tries to do the same thing that he classifies as sexual behavior. I think that he's not mad that they're being sexual, he's mad that it isn't directed towards him. He apparently thought that it was fine since one of the other players had done it, with her consent, earlier. Her response was to immediately push his head back up in the other direction, which caused him to sulk for the rest of the trip and generally ruin the vibe. This was the status quo for the majority of the semester until we got to around mid-April. The shitty dorm that two of us players were living in had burst several pipes, and both of our rooms were now without showers and working toilets. When the DM heard about this at the end of that week's session, she immediately offered to let us stay over in her much nicer dorm room where she had extra bed space, as her roommate had left and she had pushed the two beds together to make one big one. She joked that we could all share it, and since all of us were restless sleepers, it would be like a battle royale to see who gets pushed off last. She even invited Cleric to turn the thing into a big sleepover. This immediately set that guy off. He went ballistic over her inviting two guys, misgendering Cleric, to stay the night. He all but outright said that the DM was a slut who was trying to get us to have a threesome with her. The DM, who admittedly is the type of person to engage and escalate this sort of thing, argues back that even if she wasn't, it wouldn't be any of his business. This led to their biggest tirade yet, with both of them loudly arguing for several minutes, with everyone else interjecting on the side of the DM every so often. Losing that battle, he shifted to bashing the campaign instead. How people interact with nature was a big running theme, and he stated that any culture that wasn't exploiting natural resources to the detriment of the environment was doing the wrong thing. He also bemoaned that the world of the campaign wasn't sexist enough, and there were too many queer people because that's not how realistic medieval Europe was, despite the fact the campaign was never based on medieval Europe. I agree that this is something that plagues DMs and fantasy writers, not because we dislike realistic European medieval fantasy, I've run many games like that, but because people have come to conflate fantasy in general with medieval European realistic fantasy, so they just assume that it's the default. Now we have people running around judging settings based on how well they conform to an arbitrary standard that the writer didn't even attempt to develop. It doesn't matter if the Session 0 stated that this is a high fantasy, or a grimdark, or a fairy tale. there will always be someone reading it and thinking, no. This is not how Europeans behaved and thought between the years 500 and 1500 AD. It's a tricky problem with a simple solution. Have an explanation of your setting prepared before session 1, and if they try to criticize your setting on the basis of historical accuracy, just remind them that it was never your goal. Finally, he moved on to the races. The DM had heavily played with and explored how racial lineages would interact, creating a lot of uncommon half-breeds that one wouldn't encounter in a normal campaign. She also made it a point to decouple the idea that your race affects your mental stats within the story, with it being a whole plot point earlier in the campaign. That guy talked about how that wasn't realistic and that people naturally want to stay inside their own race. He said that nobody would want to have kids with an orc because then their kid would have to be a dumb half-orc. When the DM pointed out that this wasn't true, she brought up the fact that she herself was biracial. That guy's response?
Yeah, well, maybe if your mom had stayed inside her own race, she wouldn't have a daughter that's big and fat and stupid when you could have been small and
smart and pure like Asians are. What? I don't understand. Is that guy Asian? Wait, no, I don't see any Asian person self-describing as small or pure. Wait a minute. Nah, it all makes sense now. He wanted to okay, hear me out. He wanted to bang the wolf girl. He has weird and self-defeating thoughts on sexuality. He's probably every ist and phobic that exists. He's obviously some sort of 4chan Reddit creature. I don't usually throw this term around, and I don't think I've ever used it on the channel, but he perfectly fits the mold of the stereotypical incel. I don't see exactly why racist people online tend to fetishize Asians, and it can't just be because of anime, can it? Is that really enough to persuade them? Never mind, I'm not asking questions I don't want the answer to. Anyways, this was immediately met with the entire group shutting down the argument and telling him to get out, along with DM being very ready to swing on him. No longer able to get a word in, he picked up his stuff and speed walked away. The whole thing caused such a commotion that the night janitor had to come in and tell us to settle down, as we basically held the DM back from going after that guy. After all that went down, all of us players had that sleepover with the DM, where we discussed that guy's behavior and all of the red flags that he was showing. Apparently, he had been harassing Cleric on the side as well, doing things like offering to buy him a swimsuit, a bikini of course, and take him to the pool as a date. The pool in the school fitness center, by the way. During the sleepover, that guy added the DM, saying that he hopes she's having fun with that threesome, to which Cleric responds with a selfie of him and the DM fake kissing, saying, "She's busy, bro." This made that guy leave the server entirely, and the whole group agreed that this was an appropriately hilarious way to kick him out of the campaign for good. Except apparently, that guy did not get the memo, as he tried to show up to the next session acting like nothing had happened. Obviously, the group was having none of that, and officially told him that he was no longer welcome at the table. He spent the rest of the night going to other rooms where other groups were playing and complaining to them that his table had cruelly and unjustly kicked him out, and begging them to let him join their already well-in-progress games. I'm not sure the level of success that he had with that, since we still saw him around on D&D nights, but he made a point of never interacting with our group again. The last couple sessions before summer break have been much more fun without him. The pacing was noticeably faster now that we didn't have a rules lawyer harping on minor mistakes and making roleplay awkward. And the DM just seems more excited to run the game in general. We're on break now, but we're for sure coming back to the campaign once the fall semester starts, without that guy. I'm still in a bit of shock. First at him trying to come back after being kicked out, then at him going to other groups trying to get into games that were in progress, especially because he led with being kicked out of his last group. Who in their right minds would let him in? It's like opening a job interview with the fact that you got fired from your last job. This sounds like an Impractical Jokers bit. I'm gonna have a bit of a risky take, but reading this in all honesty, I also feel sort of bad for that guy. He's very clearly not socially aware. This can be due to a lot of things, but the problem people with low self-awareness have is that it's hard for them to even identify themselves as the problem, so it takes a long time for them to grow out of it. I'm not absolving that guy of responsibility, but that's probably the best explanation there is. I wonder if or when he will ever learn. I hope he does, but he has stacked the odds against himself. Anyways, thanks for watching, and as always, till next time.